I had my small group of friends, and I had a youth group, religious youth group that I was part of, where I felt more comfortable. But when I was in high school, I was basically invisible. I was afraid of talking to people. I was afraid of doing anything out of line. I was afraid of drawing any attention to myself. And I didn't have any confidence to back it up, even if I had stepped out. So I guess whether it was my 20-year-old self or my 16-year-old self, I'd probably just say, try more things, care less about what other people think about your actions, and just do what feels right to you.
Oh, man.
This is Scratch Your Own Itch, the one show that delivers the conversations that we're afraid to share, but need to. This show is all about creating a life worth living. I'm Logan Tyler Nelson, and I'm your host. So, you're going to hear conversations with creators and entrepreneurs talk about what they do, their current and past traumas, how they became who they are, and what they are truly curious about. This is the show where we talk about the things we think about a lot, but need to talk about more. Please take note that this show is not a substitute for actually creating a life worth living, because this show will stir your beliefs, make you question what it means to create a life worth living. So my promise to you is to always give you one question to answer for yourself today, to start turning your dreams into a reality.
Hey, ladies and gents. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast. I know you can be listening to any other show, but you came here, right now, and that means the world to me. Like, it really does. Like, I mean, you could be doing anything else, but you came here, right now. That's awesome. Thank you so much. I've got a huge, awesome guest on today. Like, get excited. This guy is killing it. His podcast is amazing. I love his show. His name is Rich Brooks, if you're wondering who he is. To kind of sum him up real quick so we can get into the juice of this interview, he helps small business owners grow. And really, he's not just doing this as like side hobby. He's been at this for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. I mean, he's been after this for a long time. Actually, decades. He's the president of Flight New Media. He's a digital agency in Portland, Maine, and he's the founder of Agents of Change, a weekly podcast and annual conference on digital marketing. He's the author of The Lead Machine, and he's it's a small business guide to help digital marketing. So, if this at all interests you, get ready to introduce yourself to the one and only Rich Brooks.
Logan, thanks so much for having me on the show.
Thank you for coming on, man. I love your podcast. I learned actually something last night from it, so I'm going to start implementing that soon. I really, anyone that's listening right now, I really hope that after you check out this show, you check out his show. Hey, just so we can dive right into it, what's the best story that you have that has a little underlying message behind it?
The best story that I have, let's see if I can come up with some. Well, I'll tell you the origin story of Flight New Media. Flight's been around for, like you said, a couple decades. It's 21 years old. And before I started this, I was working in medical sales, and I was working for a company. And at the Christmas party, they had, which we were having it at my boss's house, they had a psychic. They hired a psychic who was doing readings in the basement, and people were coming downstairs one at a time to be read. And, people would come upstairs and they'd say things like, "Oh my God, I'm going to meet the man of my dreams in 6 months." Or, it's like, "Hey, I'm going to have a new job in a year," which I thought was a strange thing to tell somebody at a company party. But regardless, when it was my turn to go down there, I went downstairs, and I swear to God, this woman looked like the woman from Poltergeist. The woman who came to clean out the house of psychic energy. It was so funny how she looked just like her. And instead of telling me like where I was going to be in 6 months or who I was going to marry or anything like that, she just looked at me and she said, "You need to trust your gut more." And I was like, wow, what a weird thing. Like, that's not really a premonition or anything. I got the sense from her that she felt she was reading something off me, but it really resonated with me. And I went home and I started thinking about what does that actually mean to trust my gut more. And I realized that even though I was really enjoying the sales that I was doing for this company and I liked my boss and I thought we were a good company and everything like that, it really wasn't my life's calling in any way, shape, or form. And I was really fascinated by technology, and the technology of the day was the emergence of the internet. And so within a month or so, I built a website for my company at the time, and that led from one thing to another. And ultimately, I just ended up leaving and starting my own business and trying something brand new. So I guess the message that I would impart to your listeners here is trust your gut more. It's really important that we don't find ourselves doing what other people expect or need unless that's in alignment with our own values. And ultimately, I am motivated and get out of bed every day because I am fascinated by the way that human beings interact with technology and vice versa. And I also love now the idea of helping small businesses grow online. So that's really what excites me and kind of gets me to go out and do the things I do every day.
That is so huge, Rich, that you talk about trusting the gut, because there is science that proves that there is actually a second brain inside your gut. And when it feels right and you put your one hand on your heart and your other hand on your stomach and you breathe in, and on the exhale, you think about this huge decision that you might be thinking about making, and it rings true, and your gut's like telling you to do it, that's when you go do it. So I love that you talk about that. That's amazing story for sure.
Well, I didn't realize there was science behind it, but it definitely feels right to do it. And the other thing is, if you're constantly doing something that you believe in, even the grunt work, the grind, is something you can deal with. Where when you're doing grunt work for somebody else's dream, it just doesn't feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Out of that, what's the most valuable piece of advice that you've gotten about business?
The most valuable piece of advice I've gotten about business. Well, it's interesting. I guess maybe I'm in the mindset now for my previous job, but my boss at the time was driving around, and I had actually moved from I got a job with him out of college. I was just basically a data entry person because I was always a fast keyboardist. And he started to groom me into being a sales rep for him, which I really enjoyed. But I would go out with him and meet all the clients and stuff like that. And he told me one day, he's like, you can never work for anybody else. You ultimately have to be working for yourself. And I don't know if I agree with that. I don't think that's sound advice for everybody, but for me, it was very sound advice. I mean, I know a lot of people would rather work 9 to 5 or whatever the hours are and go home and be able to leave the work behind. But for me, I realized pretty soon after that I couldn't work for anybody else. And ultimately, I was only going to be happy if I worked for myself. And I've seen this happen to me a couple times. There have been times in my career where maybe outside of Flight New Media, I partnered with other people on something. And although it occasionally worked out well, ultimately I felt kind of hemmed in. I had a conference before I started the Agents of Change conference, and we put it on for 3 years. But at the end, one of the reasons I left that group was because I wanted to put on a conference. I felt I was putting in a lot of the work. I wasn't necessarily getting enough recognition, and I thought I was putting in the lion's share of the work, and I wasn't getting to make the final decision. So I guess for me, it was just kind of like, at the end of the day, I love a collaborative process, and I love taking in other people's advice to make a better product, but I have to have that final say. So I guess just be aware of that. If that's part of who you are, you need to make sure that you get the final say.
Yeah, and I love that you say that. And it really comes down to, knowing yourself, and the key word that pops in my brain from that advice is awareness. You need to know yourself. So what is something that you would like to tell your 20-year-old self, because you know that it would help you find the true awareness?
Something I would want to tell my 20-year-old self. Well, I at 20, I was just starting to come into my own. So probably I was already on the right path. I think it would probably be a little bit of reinforcement of just, listen to what your gut is telling you and kind of follow through on that. Certainly, I wish that I had taken a little bit more chances and experimented a little bit more. I ended up with a really good life, surrounded by people who I enjoy, who love me. I've got a couple of beautiful daughters who I absolutely adore. But I guess at that point, I would have said, take a few more risks, try a few more things, see what's out there, travel. Ask beautiful women out, whatever it is that you want to do that you're afraid of. Because I think back in my 20s, I was still a little bit more afraid of the world than I needed to be. We all have to be aware that there are dangers out there, but when they interfere with the way that we enjoy life, I think that becomes problematic. It was right around my 20s, probably from 20 to 25, that I started to realize that I could be who I wanted to be, and I didn't have to be who my parents wanted me to be, or my school wanted me to be, or even my friends wanted me to be, but I should just be myself. And one of the funny things is that a lot of people who know me now but didn't know me back in high school, which obviously is a little bit before I turned 20, they think that I was always this kind of popular, outgoing guy, and I really wasn't. I was very shy. I had my small group of friends, and I had a youth group, a religious youth group that I was part of where I felt more comfortable. But when I was in high school, I was basically invisible. I was afraid of talking to people. I was afraid of doing anything out of line. I was afraid of drawing any attention to myself. And I didn't have any confidence to back it up, even if I had stepped out. So I guess whether it was my 20-year-old self or my 16-year-old self, I'd probably just say, try more things, care less about what other people think about your actions, and just do what feels right to you.
Oh man, I love that. So many people do that to themselves. They go, hey, I can be this other person that isn't what everyone else wants me to be, and I can actually step into something where maybe I'm someone completely different. So that's really cool that you discovered that by yourself.
Well, it took time, like you said. I'd
yeah.
like to go back and tell my younger self, you don't have to wait 20 years to figure this stuff out on your own.
100%. 100%, absolutely. But sometimes it takes that sort of that's part of it. That's part of the learning process.
I think you're right, Logan, because I could tell my daughters that. They may say dad knows something, or they may say dad's an idiot, but the bottom line is it will never have the same impact unless they go through it themselves. I think certain lessons can be taught and other lessons have to be experienced.
Yeah, actually, that's something I want to kind of go into is what do you think is the key to happiness? Because the reason why I asked this question is just because I think it gives context to everybody wants that thing, that H word, happiness. So what do you think it is that makes you happy today?
That makes Rich Brooks happy today? If you're asking me that question, I mean, being surrounded by people who I love and who love me back, very important, and feeling like I'm doing good in the world. And I know that that's kind of a vague thing in terms of describing it, but I want to make sure that I'm providing value, and that sounds kind of like corporate. I mean, like, I want to make sure that I'm having a positive influence on the people around me, the people I care about. And I certainly hope that I'm getting some of that back in return, but I can't control that. I can only control what I'm putting out into the world. And then I also want to just make sure that I am providing value. Like, for me to come into work, for me to have employees and coworkers and clients, it's like I want to be doing something where it actually has a more positive experience from them knowing me. So if it's a client, I want to make sure that we're doing a good job. If it's an employee, I want to feel like he or she is growing by working here. I mean, even if it's a vendor, I want to make sure that they feel like working with Flight is a really good experience. So whether it's Flight or the Agents of Change or anything else I might be involved in, I want people to walk away emotionally richer than they came into the situation. So going back to the question, like, how do you pursue happiness or how do you get there? I guess I'd say is you can't really focus on that because it's one of those elusive things. Like, if you're only focused on gaining happiness, you might occasionally hit it, but most of the time you're just going to be like, am I happy enough? Am I happy enough? That is, a treadmill that you just can't get off of. So I would say is instead, think about the things where you're doing something that makes you feel good. Don't actually be looking just at the ends, but also be thinking about the experience itself. Because sometimes when you put too much focus on, will this make me happy? Even if that thing would have intrinsically made you happy, you're so worried about if it makes you happy that it takes some of the joy out of it. So I'd probably say, based on all the things I've already said, is also just being there in the moment and enjoying that rather than always be thinking ahead or always be thinking in the past.
Oh man, you hit it on the nail on the head. I love that because it's such a little like paradox. When you try too hard, like oftentimes you don't get the results that you want. I love that you talked about that just now. That's huge aha moment for anyone that's going through the grind right now, where they're like, God, I care so much about this. I want to make the perfect business, or I want to have the perfect business model, or I want to have hundreds and thousands of fans or something like that. And they pour too much effort into something that they really care about, when if they just let off the gas pedal just a little bit, I think they may see a result that they really want.
Well, I think that comes down to, and it's hackneyed, but the journey, the trip there is half the journey, or whatever the hackneyed saying is. But it's like, you need to learn how to enjoy the entire process of it, because if you're just always on the road to happiness, you're never going to get there. But if you're looking around and you're enjoying all the aspects of getting there, if you're enjoying the fact that you got one new subscriber, your first subscriber, or your first 10 or 100 subscribers, and talking to them and engaging with them, that's really enjoyable. But if you only see them as a small step to get to 100,000 subscribers and you don't even care about them other than a number, that's not very joyful. That's not going to make you feel good. And even when you get to 100,000 subscribers, you're going to say, well, now what? Do I need to get to 1 million? Like, why do I feel so unfulfilled? So I would say that if you are in the process of building your business and you think the business is going to bring you happiness, I don't think it works like that. I think you have to say, I'm really enjoying working with this client. I'm really enjoying hiring my first person. I'm really enjoying this process that I'm going through. I'm really enjoying making mistakes and failing, as long as I take away a lesson from this. And those are really the important things. And that's what ultimately makes you happy. But if you're just sitting there and happiness is this end point that you're never going to get to, that's just going to make you very frustrated and unhappy.
Dude, I wish that statement was said instead of first grade actually happening. Like, just continue to drill that into kids' heads every day, and I guarantee we would have a different society that operates on following kids' curiosities and really making people do things because they want to. So, I mean, we could go hours and hours into that, but I want to go into something that, my audience really likes when, my guests get a little vulnerable with something in their business or something in their life. What is something that you would like to share with us that you're kind of struggling with right now?
That I'm struggling with right now? Well, it's interesting. It's kind of come full circle. I mentioned that story before about trusting your gut. And I thought of myself, especially in my 30s and 40s, and I recently just turned 50, as a very happy person. I had a very good life. I had a wife. I had 2 kids. I had this business. I had a good group of friends. And I'm just like, God, my life is really amazing. And then there started to be some cracks in the armor. And I realized that I was actually unhappy in many ways and unsatisfied. And I had realized that during the course of my marriage, I had stopped trusting my gut, and I was just going along and getting along. And it was nobody's fault but mine. And I spent some time in therapy, kind of working through some of the things. And ultimately, my wife and I worked on this together, but decided our marriage wasn't working. And although we're still remain friends, it was a very difficult time. I felt like I was failing the people around me, especially my kids, by getting divorced. It was very, very difficult. And thank God it was an amicable divorce. I can't even imagine what people have to go through when it's not an amicable divorce. And that was very difficult. And I realized in this process that I had stopped trusting my gut. And I'd really say it's only in the past few months where I feel like I've kind of got back on my feet. I'm making decisions that are not always popular, because I was one of these guys, I just want to fix things. I want to make sure everybody's happy, that everybody likes me. And I realized that because of that, I was not listening to my gut anymore. And in the last 6 months to a year, I've really been working on doing what I believe to be right, even if it's disagreeable to other people. And it has been a challenge, let me tell you, because I hate disappointing people and I hate having people not like me. That's something I struggle with all the time. And there have been times when I've disappointed my children. There are times when I've disappointed my girlfriend, and even now I have to split my time just because of the situation I'm in. And, I know that I'm letting some people down, or at least that's how they see it, or they're disappointed in the decisions I make. But I just ask myself in the quiet times, like, am I making the right decisions? And right now, with my kids being a freshman and junior in high school, a lot of my decisions, almost all of them, start with, is this in the best interest of my kids? Not, will this make my kids happy? Because that's a very different question. But is this in the best interest of my children? And that makes a lot of the decisions easier. So that's been something I've been struggling with. I feel like I'm coming out of that dark tunnel now. But it's still something I have to sit there and I have to examine a lot of the decisions I'm making and saying, am I making this decision because I believe it to be right? Or am I making this decision because I think it's expedient or people will like me because I've made this decision? And always trying to answer it, or always trying to make sure that I can answer it, and the fact that I'm making this decision because I believe it to be right.
Wow. Some deep reflection, my friend. Absolutely deep reflection. Wow. So I just got 2 more questions for you. What is your favorite book and why?
That's very funny. I've been going through a hiring process lately, and we have what we call the weird questions. And one of the questions that we ask in the middle of all of them is, what's your favorite book? And then I'm always surprised that people are like, oh, I don't know, I've got so many, or, well, here's what I read recently. And then I find myself now on the other side of the question going, oh, what is my favorite book? I will say that there's probably a few different books that come into play. And one of my favorites, if not my favorite, is a book called Grendel. And it is, there's a famous, super boring old story called Beowulf that I was forced to read as an English major, about this hero that kills this beast called Grendel. This is actually a more modern take on it, and it's from Grendel's standpoint, and he doesn't understand why everybody hates him so much, but it's also about how we tell stories and the impact those stories tell, and it's a fascinating read, and so I'll say that today that's my favorite book. Don't ask me who wrote it.
Yeah,
People can Google that.
You're good. Yeah. I'll throw it in the show notes. Awesome. And then I lied. I got 2 more questions. So where's a place that people can actually find more Rich Brooks?
Well, if they want to check me out online, there's certainly a couple places. From a business standpoint, my company website is takeflight.com. That's FLYTE.com. If they're interested in the podcast, which I'd love them to check out because we're already fans of podcasts because they listen to yours, the podcast or the conference, they like digital marketing, please check out theagentsofchange.com. And then as far as me personally, I am The Rich Brooks on every platform. I spend a lot of time on Twitter and an obligatory amount of time on Facebook, but you can easily find me on your favorite platform if you just look for The Rich Brooks.
I love it. Just so people don't have the paradox of choice where you give them too many choices and they don't go to any of them, I would head over to his Twitter. Go at him on @the Rich Brooks. Twitter @the Rich Brooks.
And don't just add me, say hello, because
Yeah.
I don't even see people when they add me anymore, but I do see people when they talk to me. So please feel free to let me know that you heard me on this show.
Awesome. Super awesome. So last thing that I fear that people use, because I don't know if you know about this, but people do use self-help, self-improvement podcasts sometimes as entertainment. Which I mean, they listen to it and they don't really do anything with it. And I really want to pressure anyone that's listening to this to really do something with it. So I like to ask the last question of sort of like a self-inquisitive question that someone can ask themselves. What's a self-inquisitive question you would like the audience to ask themselves today?
Well, based on everything we've said, I would say if you're listening to this right now, when the podcast is over and you have a moment of quiet, say, am I making my decisions based on what I believe is right or what I want other people to think about me?
I want to give a moment and let people really think about that. That's amazing. Wow. Yeah, that's huge. Please reflect on that. Thank you so much, Rich, for coming on the show. Thank you, anyone who's listening to this right now. Please hit that subscribe button if you found it inspirational or informative today. Again, Rich, I don't think this is going to be our last time talking, but I really enjoyed our time today.
Well, thanks, Logan. They were very thought-provoking questions you asked.
Thanks, man. All right. Well, so that next time I'll see everyone later. Thanks again.
There'll be girls across the nation that'll eat this up. They don't know that it's your soul, but could you bottle it up? Get down to the heart of it. No, it's my heart. You're shit out of your luck. Don't make me tell you again. Woo! Love, love, love. Hey. Love, 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 love.
Oh, wow. You made it to the very end of the show. Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Scratch Your Own Itch with your host, Logan Tyler Nelson. To make it to the end? Gosh, that doesn't happen very much nowadays. I mean, especially with the constant distraction. So, I appreciate all of the efforts that you just took out of your day to make it to the end. And if you hit that subscribe button and leave a review, you would have no idea what that would mean to me. So thank you so much for taking the time to hit that subscribe button. And if you leave a review, check it out. Just screenshot it, send it to me, and I'd love to host your review out on the show. But don't ever forget, like I say, you matter and you're enough.
Love is the main reason for how all of this happened. Love for all my fans, love for all the shows. Got love for all my memories, no matter where I go. Even if I'm out to nothing, I know there's always something. It's not a fitness test, but it'll always